In 2008, offensive numbers across college baseball randomly exploded. This just so happened to be the same year the Easton Orange Stealth was released. Today, this bat is completely banned in competitive baseball. It is almost 2 decades old, but if you want to buy one, you will have to pay up to $600. The technology in this bat is so advanced that scientists gave it an award at a NASA engineering conference, saying this baseball bat would greatly impact the future of nanotechnology. To a generation of players, this was considered hands down the greatest bat ever made. Just ask Aaron Judge, who chose to use it in the 2012 College Home Run Derby, even though the bat had been released 4 years prior in 2008, a year where the baseball industry released some of the most technologically advanced and straight up dangerous bats ever created. Over the next few years, offensive records were shattered, while simultaneously bat companies were sued by mourning parents. Jurisdictions across the country called for the complete banning of metal bats, citing multiple injuries and even deaths they claim were caused by bats that were just too powerful, leading to the banning of dozens of bats deemed too good for competitive competition. And many credit this controversial decision to one single bat, the 2008 Orange Stealth. But was the Orange Stealth actually that good?
That stinks.
I'm glad I didn't spend $400 when I was 8 years old.
This gets a lot of hype, but it didn't live up to it.
Upon release in 2008, this bat retailed for a mind-blowing $400. Adjusting for inflation, this bat cost $586 in today's money. If you look at metal bats released today, even the most expensive can't come close to costing as much as the Orange Stealth, because the technology used in the Orange Stealth is now illegal. Bats released today have more complicated sounding technology, but in reality, none of these new bats can compete with the Orange Stealth. Even bats that came a decade before the Orange Stealth are way better than the bats coming out today. When metal bats first came out in the 1970s, they were so bad, many college teams refused to use them and still use their old wooden bats instead. However, the metal bats cost between $8 to $22 each. College baseball in the 70s wasn't exactly a money-making machine. If you weren't in an elite program, you were probably losing your school money just by existing. So they switched to metal bats just because they were cheaper. Soon, every college, high school, and little league team in the country switched to metal, essentially creating a brand new multi-million-dollar market overnight. Within a few years, companies like Worth took the same low-grade aluminum used in airplanes and spaceships and made it into the Tennessee Thumper, a bat so loud some catchers wore earplugs.
That sounds so sick.
By the late 70s, bats like the legendary Green Easton were released using a way stronger form of aluminum, making it stronger yet lighter than any previous bat. Soon, companies discovered how to make bats out of titanium. Just a few years ago, metal bats were going for $20. These titanium bats retailed for up to $700 in the 1990s. All of a sudden, companies like Easton, Worth, Louisville Slugger, DeMarini, Rawlings were all in an arms race to create the most powerful metal bat possible. With zero regulations, companies were making bats with barrels as big as possible, using light metals that made the bats weigh as much as little league bats. The lightest 34-inch wood bat possible would weigh around 31 ounces. These metal bats were bigger, but weighed up to 7 ounces lighter. If the bat is lighter, the player can swing it faster, and in turn, the ball will be hit harder. As a result, college players were using drop 10 bats in actual games. Grown men essentially swinging bats that weighed the same as the bats they swung in Little League. Bats like the notorious Black Magic were released during this period, and offense skyrocketed to the point where the NCAA had to step in. To stop bats from getting too light, basically everyone now had to use a drop 5 bat. In other words, take a bat's length in inches and subtract by 5. That's how many ounces the bat was allowed to weigh. If a bat was 35 inches long, it couldn't weigh less than 30 ounces. If it was 30 inches long, it couldn't weigh less than 25 ounces, and so on. This worked at first and offense went down. Then, companies like Easton, the same company that made the Orange Stealth, started cheating the system, got around regulations, and immorally created the most dangerous bats ever created. At least according to this guy. In the mid-90s, a bat engineer and whistleblower, J.W. McKay, quit his job at Louisville Slugger because he believed the baseball bats he helped develop were becoming so powerful that they would eventually kill somebody, saying, quote, "I invented the atom bomb and didn't realize it until we got out there and shot it." Feeling guilty, he began calling out manufacturers, specifically Easton. According to him, Easton's technology got so good they figured out a way to make bats lighter without actually making them lighter. If a rules official weighed one of these bats, it would weigh 30 ounces and be deemed legal. But when a player picked up that same bat and swung it in a game, it would swing like a 25-ounce bat, way lighter than the rules allowed. By shifting the weight distribution to the handle, Easton allowed players to reach insane bat speeds. Easton also figured out how to bond carbon inside the barrel to make it thinner. They created double-walled aluminum bats, creating a trampoline effect on their barrels. Legendary bats like the Redline and the Easton Reflex were released with some of this new technology, and all of a sudden, college players were reaching exit velocities of 120 miles per hour. Only 5 players in recorded history have hit a ball 120 miles per hour in an MLB game. 20-year-olds in college were reaching this exit velocity. Studies found that these bats were adding up to 8 miles per hour to a hitter's exit velocity. The new drop 5 rule was supposed to decrease offense, but with these new discoveries, offense was at all-time highs even with the rule still in place. During a 5-year stretch starting in 1994, runs in the NCAA championship increased 300%. When metal bats were first introduced, 5.07 runs were scored a game. Now they're scoring over 7 runs a game. And this created what legitimately might be one of the craziest tournaments in baseball history. In the 1998 College World Series, there was on average 16.1 runs scored per game. The tournament ERA was 7.24 and batters hit 318. Jason Lane had a record for most hits, most home runs, most total bases, and highest batting average. His team set the record for highest batting average, most total bases, most hits, most home runs, and most grand slams. And Arizona State as a team scored 48 runs in 4 games. They played USC in the championship, where the final score was 21-14. USC won this tournament while having an ERA of 6.24. The bats had obviously gotten way out of hand, causing NCAA to create something called the BESR certification. Now, all high school and college bats had to be BESR certified. The bat had to be drop 3. The barrel could not be more than 2 5/8 inches, and the bat had to pass one simple test. They were taken to a laboratory where a 70-mile-per-hour pitch was thrown at a bat moving 80 miles per hour. If the ball coming off the bat was faster than 97 miles per hour, the bat was deemed illegal. This BESR test was way harder to manipulate, and essentially every single premium bat created over the past decade was banned overnight. The NCAA got what they wanted as offensive numbers decreased to respectable levels, but bat companies were scrambling, trying to solve an impossible puzzle: create a bat that was weak enough to pass the BESR test in a lab, then somehow leave the lab and transform into a way better bat that could compete with the bats of the late 90s. And believe it or not, somehow with some genius thinking and technology, the Orange Stealth was actually able to do that. On a mission to create the best bat possible, even with these regulations, Easton fought back, suing the NCAA, saying BESR regulations could ruin their business, successfully getting NCAA to lower the bat speed in the BESR test from 80 miles per hour to 67 miles per hour. However, all the bats of the late 90s still failed. To make things worse, the new bats were allegedly killing people, and the bat companies were now getting sued for it. In 2001, a high school pitcher was hit by a line drive off the bat of an Air Attack 2, got 5 metal plates, 75 staples, and 12 screws in his head, almost dying. 2 years later, an 18-year-old did die after getting hit by a batted ball off the bat of a TPX CB13. Louisville slugger who made both these bats were ordered to pay these families $100,000 and $850,000 respectively for not providing sufficient warning of the dangers that come with using these bats. 3 years later, another youth player was put in a coma with severe brain damage. His family not only sued Louisville slugger, they sued Little League Baseball and the store that sold the bat, eventually settling for a massive $14.5 million. Within the next several years, New York City and North Dakota completely banned metal bats in youth games. Bills across the country were introduced to do the same in Chicago, in New Jersey, in California, and Pennsylvania. A growing movement across the country was seeing metal bats as becoming too dangerous for kids. You would think this would scare bat companies from making bats even more powerful. In reality, these lawsuits might have actually helped sales. Sporting goods stores say that people were specifically asking employees which model bat was the one who killed somebody, then buying that bat thinking it had to be the best bat available. By this point, the metal bat market had exploded to become a $300 million industry. Some brands were paying college coaches over $50,000 a year just so their teams would exclusively use their bats in games. Massive brands like Nike, Adidas, and Reebok were even trying to get into the industry, while the traditional bat brands like Easton, DeMarini, and Louisville Slugger were doing everything they could to fight them off and stay at the top, knowing that the best way to do that is to create the strongest, most overpowered bat possible. And in 2008, they finally were able to do it. After 9 years, offense all of a sudden skyrocketed out of nowhere. This just so happened to be the same year the Orange Stealth was released. Easton released 4 Drop 3 Stealth models this year: the Red Stealth, the Blue Stealth, the Gray Stealth, and the Orange Stealth. But the Orange and Gray Stealth were different. They were 100% composite. Instead of making them out of a metal alloy, titanium, or aluminum, Easton started using carbon fiber polymers to create extremely strong plastic. The Orange Stealth is literally a bat made out of plastic, which somehow, unbeknownst to the NCAA, was able to trick the BESR test, making it completely pointless. Other bats that year, like the Exogrid and Voodoo, used composite handles, but Easton made the Orange Stealth fully composite. By 2008, other bats like the Catalyst and CF3 were also 100% composite, but the Orange Stealth stole the show. A story out of Southern Miss says when a player tried to use a different bat, his coach stopped him and made him use a Stealth. The kid went to the plate and hit a bomb. Teams like LSU made it famous, winning 23 straight games in 2008 using the Orange Stealth. That's an SEC record, the most dominant baseball conference in the country. 9 out of the 12 schools were sponsored by Easton and all used the Orange Stealth. There was added attention on college baseball at the time due to the release of the 2007 college baseball video game, and that year in the College World Series, Fresno State became the worst team record-wise in history to win the College World Series. And maybe that's because they were also using the Orange Stealth. The bat was gaining a reputation across baseball. It was so good, a guy was caught with 3 of them in his pants in an attempt to steal them from a store in Omaha. But the next year, NCAA realized something was going on. A whole new generation of bats had come out. There was even a brand new Easton Stealth. However, many college teams were still using the old orange Stealth. LSU, who hit 100 home runs the year before, hit even more in 2009, still using the orange Stealth. That season, a player at Tennessee hit a 500-foot bomb using the orange Stealth. After the game, the opposing coach publicly called him out, saying a homer of that distance is impossible without a juiced bat, called for every composite bat to be banned, and even prohibited his own team from using composite bats just based on principle. And he had a point. All of a sudden, teams were scoring close to 7 runs a game, essentially reaching the same offensive numbers caused by the juice bats of the late 90s. It seemed obvious that bats were juiced again, but it made no sense because every single bat being used had passed the BESR test and was certified. So the SEC made an announcement. They would test every single composite bat used in the upcoming SEC tournament to see what was going on. And somewhat suspiciously, based on available footage of the 2009 SEC tournament, none of the LSU starting lineup used an orange Stealth in this tournament. Shortly after, in the Super Regional, still no LSU player was using the orange Stealth. But come the College World Series, all of a sudden, the orange Stealth was back. A third of the starting lineup was using it. Most notoriously, Ryan Schimpf got first team all-tournament, hitting .348 with 3 homers and 7 RBIs while using the orange Stealth. The team averaged 8.5 runs a game and went on to win the entire thing in front of what was at the time the biggest crowd in College World Series history. The publicity this team and tournament brought the orange Stealth might be the single biggest reason its reputation has become so legendary, but this would be the last college baseball game ever a orange Stealth was allowed to be used in. Because during this tournament, the NCAA took 25 bats used in games and tested them, finding out that only 5 of the 25 bats tested actually passed the BESR test, even though all 25 were BESR certified and presumably had passed the test before. 20 of the 25 bats were now juiced way past the legal limit. And this wasn't because LSU or any other team was taking legal bats then doing something to them to make them illegal. It was because that's exactly what these bats were designed to do. Composite bats are constructed out of small microfibers. The more the bat is used, the more compressed these microfibers become. Over time, this compression creates a bigger trampoline effect and higher exit velocities, meaning the bat literally gets better over time. So when NCAA would test a brand new orange Stealth fresh out the wrapper, it would produce reasonable exit velocities and pass BESR regulation. But once it left the lab and was used for a while, it would become significantly stronger, producing exit velocities on par with the juice bats of the 90s. The first composite bats were released decades ago, but companies stopped making them until brands like Easton realized composite bats were the secret to beating the BESR test. In 2007, they released 2 100% fully composite bats. Unless you count Mikan, Easton was the only major bat company to offer a 100% fully composite Drop 3 model. They maximized the break-in effect and the next year released the Orange Stealth. The rest was history. New bat models come out every year, but since it got better over time, we saw the Orange Stealth used in 3 different College World Series. That is unheard of, and that led to more publicity and airtime for the bat. By the time LSU used these bats in 2009, they had likely been broken in for almost 2 years, perhaps being some of the most juiced bats of all time. When kids got new bats to replace their old Orange Stealths, they realized their new bat couldn't come close to competing with their Orange Stealth they had broken in over the last year. If a kid on your team had a 2-year-old Orange Stealth, it was likely the most juiced bat on the team, outperforming new bats that people were spending up to $400 on, giving an entire generation the impression that no bat could ever come close to competing with the Orange Stealth. After testing the bats in the 2009 College World Series, NCAA decided they had no choice but to completely ban composite bats until they could come up with a better test, eventually creating the BB Core standard. The strictest bat standards ever that are still in place today. Teams went from scoring 7 runs a game to scoring close to 5 runs a game. Less runs a game than when NCAA was still using wooden bats, meaning that BB Core metal bats released today are probably closer to wood bats than they are to bats like the Orange Stealth that came out 15 years ago. The Orange Stealth was the last great bat of an era filled with juice bats, which is why it will always live in infamy. A bat so good, it killed metal bats forever.